everyone. Quick announcement. I want to announce the unconference talks that will start in like 10 or 15 minutes in the other room. So first priority is, of course, the talk by Stephan. So we will have word creation with PHP word and CD templates and a little XML from Maria. I think she's already up there. Second unconf talk will be Symfony Flex private recites from Sebastian Sellmeier, sorry. Third one will be CQRS and event sourcing with PHP by Marcello Santos. And the fourth one will be automation with Ansible. This is the only talk in German, all the others will be in English. So the unconf track is in the other room upstairs, so if you're interested in one of the talks, join us upstairs. Otherwise, have a lot of fun with Stephan, please.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. As you might realize, I'm not Georgina. I will not talk about website performance. I'm Stephan and I will talk about GitLab. When I'm not a backup speaker, which doesn't happen so often, I do run my own company. The company is called BitExpert. We are a technology company doing custom projects for our clients. My current role with BitExpert is called Head of Technology, which means I'm responsible for getting technology knowledge into the company, as well as the whole educational and training part. So we established a Learn and Pro program where we're just going to educate our developers and stuff. Since I've still got some spare time left, and I'm not exactly sure how that happened, I ended up being a co-organizer of not one but two PHP user groups. One is called the PHP user group in Frankfurt, and the other one is called the PHP user group. It's not Mannheim, it's Metropolregion Rhein-Neckar. So if you've been to the keynote from Jenny this morning, this is like the proper name. It's ridiculous, right? Yeah, totally. Anyways, so I guess you're not here for me. Well, technically you're also not here for GitLab, but we'll talk about it anyways. I learned this a couple of months ago. So one of the speakers I was following said, a conference talk needs a quote from Wikipedia. So here we go. If you go on Wikipedia and search for GitLab, this is what it says. It's a web-based Git repository manager with wiki and issue tracking features. And to be fair, that was what GitLab was when they started this project. Today, it's like a lot more. Like, I think a year or a year and a half ago, they announced their Beyond CI/CD strategy, meaning that they do not only want to cover like the development part, but also like the whole operations part and making sure like everything like works seamlessly together. Meaning you can use GitLab to plan, create, and verify, and package your application or your libraries, to create releases, because that's what we usually do, but also to configure like your build pipelines, to monitor your applications. If you've been to the Prometheus talk, it's really important to monitor that stuff. And GitLab can actually be connected to Prometheus. And then swap over to the development part again and start either planning new features or improving existing features, and so on and so forth. By the way, who of you is using GitLab? Okay, cool. Who likes GitLab? Okay, almost the same amount of hands. That's good. Who uses the CI stuff? Okay, cool, awesome. So let's see what you guys learn from this session. So for those of you who don't know what GitLab is or how to get started, there are a couple of ways you could install GitLab. So there is the classic omnibus installer that you can download and install that stuff. You could install this via Debian packages or RPM packages, or if you're one of the cool guys, just going to use Docker, like in this example. This is basically how we run it. Even though we don't use the existing official images, we've built them our own because, how do I say this best? Because reasons. This is probably the best explanation for that. Details really don't matter. So this is GitLab. So now we got it running, but we need two more things. Since we want to do this whole Docker stuff, we do need a private Docker registry, right? We don't want to publish all those images, maybe the ones from our client publicly. That would be, not so cool. And you got a couple of options. So these days, GitLab does offer a Docker registry by itself, so that you don't need to install anything. Back in the days when we started, this wasn't the case, so we were looking for an alternative, and we picked Zonotype Nexus. Mostly because we had already running that system in our environment, and we just needed to upgrade to the latest version to support a private Docker registry. So this is, for those of you who don't know, this is Zonotype Nexus is like some fancy Java application or being able to manage Maven packages. These days they also manage Bower packages, NPM, Docker registry, and whatnot. So basically like kind of everything out of the box. There is no like predefined image out there, so we had to build it on our own and obviously run it as a Docker container. So for those of you who don't know what Nexus looks like, this is like their awesome fancy UI. But you don't need to interact with that anyways. What's really important, and this does not only apply to Nexus, but also if you would use the GitLab registry, you need to authenticate during the builds. So you could do that once on the host, or in the builds each and every time, because credentials and stuff, right? You don't want to export that stuff publicly, otherwise you have a public registry, which doesn't make sense. So you need a way to authenticate. Just call Docker login, provide username and password, and then off you go, and then Docker can download all the images. Cool, so that's piece number 2. The third piece that we need is a reverse proxy. Oh, awesome, fanboy, cool. So you could use anything you want, Nginx and whatever's out there. We use traefik because awesome, right? Okay, yeah, sure. You have to believe me in this case. Super simple to configure, just a single configuration file. You define your default entry points, so like what traefik will serve the traffic from, HTTP, HTTPS in this case. We define the entry points then, or map those to the ports, saying HTTP traffic is served from port 80. Whenever an HTTP request comes in, automatically redirect it to HTTPS, so my application doesn't care about that stuff. And then we configure the HTTPS endpoint, saying, hey, this runs on port 443, and this is like the certificate that you want to use. Since we are using the myapp.log domain, I can't use something like Let's Encrypt. So I just generated a self-signed certificate and I'm going to use that. If you serve public sites, you can easily use Let's Encrypt to then generate certificates on the fly and then just going to do magic. So now traefik needs to get the data from somewhere, like figuring out like what container is available and which domains to map onto those containers. And traefik supports a bunch of what they call backends. The easiest one is probably Docker. So it's just going to say, hey, there's a Docker daemon running over here. Just connect to that, do your magic, and everything is good and fine. There are a bunch of others. There's like etcd and probably Kubernetes and stuff. I'm just going to Rancher as well. Yeah, just pick what makes the most sense for you. And then obviously, because we are the cool guys, we run it as a Docker container. And that's what you do these days. We're just going to mount the Docker socket into the container so that traefik can interact with Docker. And we're just going to mount the configuration file into the container. And that's all you need to do. And by that time, traefik is up. GitLab has booted, GitLab has been installed, hopefully, and we can log in and create our first project. So clicking the Create Project button leads us to a view that looks like this. We just need to specify the project name. We can specify a description, and then just configure the visibility if we need. And I'm just going to click Create, and that's cool. Now, obviously, for a talk about deployment, I need an application. Now, I could have built an application by itself, but that would have contained the risk that I build an application like in the best possible way for this whole setup. So I thought that's not a good idea. I want a challenge. I want an application that is complex, maybe complicated, and not so easy to install. And I picked Magento. Okay. Magento lovers in here? One, okay, cool. So what you do in Magento is you can compose a create project. just point it to repo-magento.com, so all the stuff will be downloaded from there. And after downloading like half of the internet, we have a Magento instance up and running. And we can then add, commit, and push the files, and then just gonna end up in our GitLab instance. And that looks like this. Now up to this point, nothing happens in regard of automated builds or stuff like that. It's like the process is ended here. To be able to run those builds, you need a separate tool from GitLab. And this is called the GitLab Runner. Again, you can install it as a Debian package, RPM package, Docker, whatever. And the general idea is that this runner will then run the builds. If you are familiar with the Jenkins model, with like the Jenkins master and the build nodes, this is exactly the same. So like the Jenkins master would be the GitLab CI instance, and the GitLab runners are the build nodes where the builds run. So the master is just going to coordinate which job should run where, and those jobs will be run on the runners that can be installed like everywhere you want, which is pretty cool because to get started, you can use the GitLab SaaS offering and run those runners internally in your company or in your data center, and just going to connect that to the SaaS instance. So you don't need to host GitLab yourself to be able to do all that cool stuff. So that's cool. Again, we are using just a Docker container to run the runner. And what happens now is we have one container running GitLab and GitLab CI, and one container running the runner instance. Now, up to this point, they don't know each other, right? They live independently. Now we need to connect both. And to do that, we have to create a runner instance. Now, this is the part that really then executes the code. We simply call GitLab Runner register, and this will ask us a couple of questions, like, what's the GitLab URL I should talk to? What is the authentication token I need to connect to this GitLab instance? Because obviously you don't want any third-party runner to connect to your GitLab instance and it's going to run the builds. That's like not a good idea. So they use these tokens. So in the admin section of GitLab, you can like see a token, and you're going to need to paste it over here, and then everything's fine. You can add a description, like if you have like dozens of runners, you can then like define what they are doing and what they are for. You can define tags for those runners. I'm covering this later, why this is, or why this can be important. You can define if a runner should be able to run builds that are not tagged, or if they should only run builds that are tagged. You can lock a runner to a specific project, which is also pretty cool. So if you need a kind of separation for these runners in your setup, you can do that. And then the most important question is, you need to choose the so-called executor. Like, how are the commands that you define are executed? GitLab Runner can spawn a Docker image or a Docker container and then run those commands within the Docker container. You could use the shell executor, so all these commands would be executed on the host, in this case as the GitLab CI user, which can cause some issues if you want to install like third-party packages and stuff, so you need to be careful about that one. And there are dozens of combinations like Docker and Docker machine and Docker SSH and whatever. So you can pick and choose like what's like the best combination for you and for your use case. And then last but not least, you can define a default Docker image that should be used in case your project doesn't define a Docker image as a starting point. So you would provide a sensible default that just makes the best sense for you. Right. The outcome of this is a configuration file that looks like this. You can change like all the settings over here, and then it's going to reload the runner, or you then use the runner instance to reconfigure stuff. What you can do in here, and you see this in the lower part, you can define volumes that are automatically mounted inside the container. This is an idea that we used back in the days when we did a lot of like Vagrant and Puppet stuff, where we like stored all the downloaded packages on the host, on the local machine, so that you didn't need to re-download all that stuff over and over again. And we used the same mechanism in here because it doesn't make any sense to download like the same composer package for each and every build. So this will definitely speed up your build process. So that's this. Now, in the beginning, I said I want to use a real-world example with Magento. Now, there's a kind of interesting challenge with Magento because you need to, as a user, need to authenticate against the repository, so you can't publicly download the files without authentication credentials. Sure, I could like hard code these settings within the configuration file of my project, but that's like, yeah, I don't want to do that. I want a cooler solution. And GitLab helps with that because they provide a feature called managing secrets. And the cool thing about this is I can define secrets either on a project level or on a group level. So if I'd have a group, Magento projects, and down or below the group all the different projects, I can define those credentials for the group, and it will then inherit these credentials for all the different projects. So central location to store the data, always cool. This is how it looks. Just like name the variable and define its value, and you're good to go. And these values will be then exposed as environment variables during the build. That's basically it. Now, up to this point, we still have no build running. So what do we need? Very simple. Just add a .gitlab-ci.yml file in your root directory and commit that, and that's all you need to do. If you're familiar with Travis and stuff, like who's using Travis? Okay, so this is relatively similar, but completely different. Just kidding. So on top you can see we define our image that is used in all the different jobs, so the PHP 7.1 CLI image. Apparently Magento needs a couple of PHP extensions that are not part of the image, so I need to build them and download all the libraries and stuff beforehand. And this is like the part of the presentation that took the most time for me. It was like 17 commits, which was like a whole Saturday afternoon of constantly rebuilding and deploying and rebuilding and deploying. So that was kind of annoying, but in the end I got it working. Details really don't matter. Afterwards I'll share the slides so you can see what I installed and stuff, but for the sake of this presentation, it doesn't matter. So after we install that, we install Composer, just copying the stuff from the Composer manual. And then, as I said in the beginning, we need to pass these credentials for repomagento.com to Composer so that it knows when to send them, just by calling the config command, and that's it. Little side note over here, if you like this feature, you can thank me later, because this is basically something I laid out a couple of years ago. Fortunately or unfortunately, Jordi like completely rewrote my PR and made it like tenfold better. But I can still claim this is like my idea. So we got this on video, right? Cool. And we're just going to do the, what's that?
Marry me.
Later. And then we do the Composer install, and then just going to download, like, as I said, half of the internet, and we're good to go. So we add, commit, and push this file, and this is what happens. Now you can probably see this blue icon next to the git char. This basically means, hey, there is a build running, right? So I don't need to configure stuff. I'm just going to need to take this file, push it, and the magic happens. If you click that icon, this is what we see. You can see like all the build pipelines that are available. If you click on the build pipeline, we can see basically the contents of the pipeline. So we got a test stage. This is the test with the uppercase T, running the test job, test with a lowercase t. If we click on that, and this again is pretty similar to what Travis and the other offerings are doing, you can see like all the outputs that are generated during this build. And hopefully, if we have done things right, at the end it will say, job succeeded. Okay. Now, since I said in the beginning, Magento is a bit special and needs a bit stuff to run, this is quite okay. So at least now I know I can install Magento, but I still don't know, does it run? I have no idea, right? To prove that, I need to install it. To install it, ideally I have something like a MySQL database, because that's one of the requirements. Now what I could do is like run the Docker commands that are needed to install and spawn or create the image directly in my GitLab CI.yml file. But that's like, nah, I want something cool. And GitLab offers us something cool, and they call it GitLab Services. So I can define a list of services that should be run automatically by GitLab before my job actually starts running. So technically I can be sure that that stuff is running, but the GitLab guys say, well, technically we aren't 100% sure, but there is the possibility that something can go wrong, but usually it doesn't. So we just take that for granted and say, it's always running and I can be sure that that stuff is there. The cool thing about the solution is that GitLab itself will check like which ports are exposed by those containers and just gonna wait till these ports are accessible so that GitLab knows the service is up and running and then starts running my jobs. So I don't need like magic wait and stuff till all the containers are up. So GitLab just gonna takes care of all of that, which is really handy. So what do I need to do? Well, again, we define our base image. We had a variables section, so these define some environment variables. I can use them in my own jobs, but also like all the services that are attached to it are able to read these variables and use that. So the MySQL_root_password is also passed to the MySQL container. So I do know the password that is set and I can connect to that. We define our test stage as we've seen before. And then we add a section called services. And there we list like all the different services that should be run. I could define those globally so that those are spawned each and every time when a job is run, but it doesn't make sense to have like MySQL running twice on staging and production because I want to deploy them on my own or start on my own. So I'm just going to move that just to the testing section. And that's basically it. Now when the build is executed, I'm not sure if you can read it from the back, but in the middle says starting my service MySQL 5.6, pulling image MySQL 5.6, and then it will just run the PHP 7.1 container afterwards. That's like magic and super easy. Cool, but still we are not there. We are not there. We need build pipelines, right? Because what we now have isn't really a build pipeline. It's like just one stupid job that runs. I want something cool. And this is how we do it. So first there's some shared config as we've seen before, taking or defining the image, defining the environment variables, and then we define our stages. Now this is probably the most easy setup ever. We got a test stage, we got a build stage, and we got a deploy stage. Now this may or may not make sense for you depending on your context. So you can define a before script section which would list like all the commands that should be run before each and every job should be run. You could add the Docker login stuff over here, for example, but also if you need to prepare your environment for some really weird use cases, you could do it here. In this case, this doesn't make any sense to these commands that you can see over here to install the libraries and compiling the PHP extensions. I don't want to run that on staging. I don't want to run that on production, right? Because on staging and production, I just want to pull the Docker container and it's going to run it. So in that regard, it doesn't make any sense for this case, but I just wanted to show it for the purpose of completeness. Right, then we define our test stage as we've seen before. We define our build stage. The magic will be shown later. And then we define our deploy stage. Now the difference to the other stages is the tag that I'm using. So just going back to the slide, test and build runs on each and every runner that exposes the tag Docker, while the deploy staging stage runs only on runners that expose the tag docker-stage. And this totally makes sense. Let's say you have a huge data center. And down here are all the runners that are tagged with the tag Docker. Right? They're just there for running the tests and running the builds. Now, if I want to deploy, I need to make sure that the build is running over here. I'm sorry. Running over here, because like all the staging domains point to this part of my data center, right? If I would deploy the staging container over here, it would just not work. So that's what you can use tags for. Now this is a very simplified example, and it doesn't make sense in like the real world, but to give you an idea of how you could do things, this is the way you could do. What we also define for staging as well as production builds, we say, please don't do a git checkout, right? I don't care about the Git repository. All I care on staging and production is like pulling that damn Docker container from the registry and running. Then we define our environment. We give it a name, staging, makes sense, and we define a URL, stage.myapp.log. Now this is probably one of the awesomest features ever, because what this does is GitLab will expose a couple of buttons in the UI, and you can click on those buttons, and GitLab will open this URL. So you don't need to document where the heck is the bloody staging system defined, or what's the URL of our production environment. It's documented in the YAML file, and you don't need to know that. You're just going to click that button. This is like super awesome. And then we say, builds should only run for commits and master. Why this is important, I'll show you later. Again, we push this, and this is then how our build pipeline looks. So we got the test, build, and deploy stage, and the test, build, and the deploy staging jobs. So test is running as before, hopefully gets green, yay, which will then kick off the build, and this is what happens. And to be fair, this is highly experimental, so I'm toying with different ideas on how to properly build Docker containers. I'm not really happy with the current solution, but it's like the best I could think of. So what we do after like composer install, we're just going to package all that stuff, we tar gzip it. We move the tar gzip back in the project directory, and then when we run the Docker build, we pass this tar gzip as a build parameter. That way, I just need like one Docker file that can handle like local builds as well as then production environment builds, because I don't have the difference of like adding and like linking files. So not the coolest solution, but it feels okay-ish. It's also important to note there is this CI commit ref slug variable. This identifies the current branch I'm working on, so I get a clear distinction of how to name things and also how to tag these containers in a proper way. So that's what we do now. We tag it and we push it, and if everything went through fine, it will appear in our registry. So from this point on, we can pull that stuff. Cool. So that stage is green as well. Awesome. And then obviously the deploy staging build will kick off down here in our environment where the stuff is running. And what we do is, or it looks like this. So again, very simplified, we pull the latest version of this image. Now you can see we use the same CI commit ref slug variable, and this is exactly the same for each and every build during this process. So even though this stuff runs on a completely different machine, the variable is the same, so we're referring to the same state, which is important. We stop the MySQL containers, we delete them, we run them again, we run the application, link it to the MySQL one, and we pass a couple of labels to it. Traefik.enable, traefik.frontend.rule, traefik.protocol. And this then instructs Traefik to do the mapping of the host name to the right container. So that's all you need to do. And if everything worked fine, or you wait a couple of minutes, and then this is what is deployed on staging. So technically we're live, woohoo! Cool, so how does that thing goes in production? Pretty much the same as the stage build. Again, we're using a different tag, docker-prod, so we can be sure like where that stuff is deployed. And then like all the scripts run. Again, we don't want the git checkout because stupid. Not needed, I'm sorry. We define our production environment, point it to the right URL. And again, you have all these buttons over there that will then open the correct URL in your browser. We also say only for changes that apply to the master branch. The only difference to the staging environment is this. So we add a when manual trigger, because if I would leave that out, the moment it's deployed on staging, the moment it would go live on production. This is probably not what you want, at least if you want some testing beforehand. So when manual basically means someone has to manually like approve the changes and then kick off the deployment. Now in the pipeline, this looks like this. So we got two jobs in the deploy stage, deploy staging, deploy prod. So first test runs, build runs, deploy staging runs, and then the process stops. Now if you might be able to spot this, there is a play button next to the deploy prod job. Now, if you see a play button, you probably think, hey, let's press the play button, which is generally a good idea. And this will then kick off the build on the production side. So once your client or your project manager like approves all the changes, someone from your team like can press this button and then kick off the build to production. And the cool thing about GitLab is they will tell you that this is a production build. So if you're going to go into details, they say, hey, this job is creating a deployment to production. Now, this is probably the right time to hit the cancel button if you figure out, damn, this was like the wrong button I clicked. Otherwise, it's too late. So you got some extra backup over there. And then like all the commands run as we've seen before. And then after a while, we're live. Awesome. And that's basically the whole story. Now we can deploy to staging, can deploy to production, all automatically, all from GitLab. That's pretty cool. But to be fair, there's like one problem. Like, the more you commit on the master branch, the more often like those containers will go up, go down, and nobody has a clue like which version is like running where and how should I figure that out. If you've got multiple developers, that can be really a problem, especially if the project manager or when the project manager like tests a feature, like the container is getting down, a new version is deployed that just is completely different. That can be annoying. Ideally, we had an environment per developer where each of the developers can like play on their own. It's completely isolated, pretty cool. Even cooler would be an environment per branch, right? So I create a new branch, I develop my changes, I push it, and then this whole thing gets deployed, and I can test this like completely independently. And this is like the awesome feature GitLab names the review apps. To be fair, it took me a while to completely figure out like what this really is and how that really works, because the manual is relatively abstract on that topic, and their example is probably not really the best. So I give you all the nitty-gritty details that I figured out on my own, just for free. The general idea is that GitLab is able to create these environments that we've just seen like automatically on the fly or dynamically. That's the better term. How does that look? Again, pretty similar to the configurations we have seen before. We use a different tag again, docker-review, to make sure it runs where it needs to run. You get the whole story. We don't need git checkouts. And here is the magic. Pay attention, guys. We can use variables for the environment name and for the URL. So we use the CI commit ref name, which is like the branch name that I'm currently working on, and the CI environment slug variable, which is like a URL encoded version of the branch name plus a unique identifier stuff for the host name. So all I need to do, or all the IT administration of your company needs to do, is like making sure like all subdomains of stage myapp.log like point to this section in a cluster where the review apps should run. And that's all you need to do. We also define a job that should be run whenever such an environment is stopped. So this is what we define with the onStop marker. Say whenever the environment stopped, call the stop review job, because obviously when we don't need the environment anymore, I want to destroy the Docker containers that are running for this environment, right? Otherwise, those Docker containers will like pile up and pile up and pile up, and then eventually, well, we are on the cloud, so it doesn't matter, but if you guys host bare metal, you probably run into issues. So we're just going to stop those containers. That's the basic idea. And then we say, run those review apps only on branches, but not on master, right? Master is going to staging and production, and all other branches are going on this review apps magic thingy. Now, again, the stop review job looks like this. We use the same stage, use the same tags, and then just going to do the magic to stop the containers. Details don't matter for now. Again, no git checkout, obviously. And we also have to define when manual, which is like crazy to do that here because I don't manually trigger that stuff, but it's like kind of like manually triggered when you close the environment. So technically, it's complicated. Long story short, you need it. And then again, we define the environment that should be stopped and just going to call action stop. So GitLab also knows, hey, this environment is not needed anymore. We're just going to remove it from our internal data structures. That's basically all you need. So let's test that stuff. Let's assume a client, or the client comes back to us and says, hey, pretty cool Magento site, but I want the catalog and stuff not publicly available, right? You should log in first to be able to see all the catalog, because important. Luckily, we already have built a module for that, so let's use that. Since we have to use a separate branch, which is going to create a branch, we install this module, and then you guessed it, we add commit and push it. And if we then log into GitLab, most of you probably know this, GitLab will scream at you, merge request, merge request, merge request. So you need to click that button, give that merge request a good title, give it a very good description, like none, just kidding. And then click the create merge request button, which creates a merge request, which in turn will kick off the build pipeline, right? So the testing will run, the build will run, the image is built and pushed to the Docker registry, and then, since this is a branch, the review apps will run, right? And at the end, GitLab even will tell you that, saying, hey, I deployed this branch on this URL. And guess what? You can click on this link. Whoa. It will open a browser and it will exactly give you this environment just for you, completely isolated from the rest. This is pretty awesome, pretty amazing. So if you click on the link and follow it, we can see it. Like, I need to log in first to see anything. Awesome, that's cool. Are you impressed? All or nothing, guys, not no. Wait. Now, the $1 million question obviously is how to get this stuff on staging and production. Has any one of you an idea how to do that? Yes? Exactly. Like, all you need to do is click that bloody green merge button. Like, there's nothing else you need to do, because that generates a merge commit on the master branch, which kicks off the build pipeline. You get the story, right? So we run the test, we run the build, we run the staging deployment, someone signs it off by clicking the deploy button, and it's up in production. How cool is that? Now, I'm not sure how long you guys are in this industry, but I remember the times where we had to go to our clients and ask the IT department to deploy new servers, and that could take like weeks or months, or require them to create subdomains, which could take like days or weeks. This is instant. Like, this is really awesome. It can't get faster than that. And that's not all. That's not all. You can see all those environments that GitLab created. There's an environment overview page, which is going to list like all the environments that are available. It can show you like when was deployed the last time, what's the commit that's currently live, who did the change, and when was it updated. I could also hit like the play button over here, or say like redeploy if I figure out like, well, there is something wrong, I need to restore the old version. That's also possible from this view. And we can drill down a bit deeper, like clicking on the staging environment and see exactly like which builds have landed on staging, what's like the latest one. And so track what's going on. And this is like really powerful. And there's also like this monitoring button on the top right. This would then hook up to Prometheus and show you like all the little graphs and details and stuff, so you know how your application is performing. So that's really amazing. The only thing I really miss in this case is an overview that would show me like which issues have been closed by these commits. Like, that would be like really powerful. We've built such a similar tool a couple of years ago, so that would be really cool to figure out, like I could easily like tell the client, hey, with the latest version, like these commits are all closed, happy or not. So I would need to do that kind of manually, like going through the list of issues and then figuring out what got deployed. But for the rest, this is like really super awesome. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I was a lot quicker than I thought, but that means we have a lot of extra time for questions if you really want to challenge me. Thank you very much for attending this session. Are there questions? Yes.
You showed the possibility to configure the variables in GitLab UI. And it has been the database password in the user, as I remember. And
right.
In your examples, it would mean that in every environment you will have the same variables, isn't it?
In this example, yes, but like you could define like multiple variables and just going to name them differently,
okay.
And then just going to use the different variable names in the different environments.
And you would admit different variables to different stages, or how do you do this?
Well, like all environment variables would be passed to all different stages.
Okay.
So you can't like filter them out. At least I think you can't.
Okay, cool.
So that's like kind of downside, but one we could live with, I guess. Anyone else? Oh yeah, way in the back, way in the back. Move, 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 run.
We are dealing with a mono repo where we have a front end written in Angular and a PHP backend. And theoretically, it would be great when we have different stages or deployment stages for each part of the mono repo. At the moment, we're just making change in the front end section, and all pipelines go through, and so the back end is building every time. Do you have a hint on that or an idea?
So you only would want to redeploy like the front end if you do front end changes?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
No. Well, maybe you could, I'm not sure if this is possible, but you probably could filter out or check by the Git history, like what have changed, and then like do some regular expression magic to figure out, hey, this is like a change in the front end path, and you're just going to do the front end rebuild. But this sounds like a really horrible solution. The more I talk about it.
Tags, but perhaps.
Or like taking like the Git commit that it was coming in, and then just use the GitLab API to query stuff. But yeah, that sounds like really horrible.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Over here.
Hi, great talk. Question about the review apps. So the pull request has been opened, the application has been deployed, it goes into review, and additional changes are asked. So what happens when the new changes are pushed to the repo? Does the container gets recreated, or how does it work?
That is a very good question. I actually never tested it, but come on, Michelangelo, come on. Friends, what should I tell you? I would suppose that the container is rebuilt, yes, because there is an additional change on this branch. So you build a new version of the container and then push it with the same tag to the Docker registry, and then it would download it again with the same tag. So,
but would
technically that should work.
Would the URL change as well?
Say that again?
Would the URL change as well? The URL to the review app?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Thank you.
Anyone else with some easy questions? Yeah. I saw that.
Hi. I was just wondering, I can see how this would be beneficial if you were already on GitLab, but is there any real benefits to this CI pipeline if you're on, say, GitHub and Jenkins?
Yes.
So I guess that wasn't easy enough.
Well, the real benefit, and I mean, like, pre those times, we also used Jenkins, and we also used Jenkins like in combination with GitLab. The real benefits for me are multiple. So back in the days, we had a Jenkins plugin running that would then also talk to GitLab to figure out like what stuff is going on, and also do like the thumbs up in the merge request if everything was fine. But at some point, that whole stuff stopped working, maybe because we had a super old version of Jenkins or whatnot, so that was a kind of bit annoying. The real killer for me in this case is basically two things. First of all, I don't need to configure a separate application, right? I just commit this file to the Git repository and the magic starts. I don't need to create a Jenkins job, point it to the right repo and stuff. It just works. And the second point I just forgot, damn it. Oh yeah, configuration as code. Right? So if you configure the stuff in Jenkins, it's like in Jenkins, but it's like it's not versioned, and versioned in the same way that your Git repository is. In that way, it is, right? You've got the whole package on your own. So those are the two killer arguments for me on that regard. And to be fair, it's super easy to set up. That's probably then the fourth argument, yeah. Are you happy with the answer? Awesome. Anyone else? Come on, we've got 15 minutes to waste. I need more questions.
Hey, how do you keep your Docker registry clean?
That's not part of this talk. Just kidding. Just kidding. That's indeed a tough problem that we are currently, well, technically not dealing with, because our hard disks are way too big for, for turning this into a problem. At least for the Nexus thing, there is an API where you can like clean up stuff. Well, technically you need to iterate like over all the images and delete like the old ones. But then you still need to define like what is old, right? Which kind of versions and stuff. So currently, I hate to say this, but this is a manual job, and this sucks. And we need a solution for that. Well, what we could potentially do, at least for the review app stuff, is in this job where you like stop the container on your environment, you could then also issue a call to Nexus saying, hey, okay, please delete this image. So that would at least help managing like all the review apps images. But I don't think there's like a good solution out of the box where you could like say, okay, don't delete like the 5 last images for production, and yeah, I don't know. It really depends on your use case, I guess. I know that answer sucks, but to be honest, it's a tough situation. Anyone else? Cool.
Hi, is it possible to deploy several releases on production? For example, every month you get new release, and then you don't want to deploy master because master continue like to develop, but you stay, okay, in the middle of the month I stop I will say feature stop, and this kind of branch will be, or tag, whatever, will be deployed on production.
Yes, that is possible, but I guess it requires a bit of work. I think in this only except thing, you could use a regex to figure out like which branches should be deployed. So you could like say, okay, my branches on production should start with like production and then version number or something like that, and they can like use that as a regex to only run then for these branches. So that would be possible, yes. A bit more complicated, but I guess possible. Anyone else?
Hi. Have you tried the GitLab CI security feature, also static security feature?
Not yet, no. So currently we are on the open source version. And I think this is like part of the...
No, so it's
really? Okay.
Part of the
I didn't follow that for a couple of weeks or so. Okay, cool. No, I haven't tried that. Okay.
Okay.
Does it work with PHP as well?
Yes.
Oh, that's awesome. Now I got some homework to do, I guess. Anyone else? Kind of feeling like a conductor. Not composer. Or maybe, I don't know. Right.
Okay, would you always recommend to use the Docker executor, or in some cases you could also use shell, or is this a bad idea because it's running on the GitLab Runner itself?
Well, so far we use both. We use the Docker executor and the shell executors. We usually use the shell executor to build these containers, so that we avoid all these Docker in Docker problems that you might have with like mounting the sockets and then problems and stuff. So for building the images, we usually use the shell runner. But that means that you have to have like all the libraries already installed on the server, because like you don't want the GitLab Runner user to be able to install all that stuff because security and stuff. So that can be quite tricky. But like for the projects that we are currently working with, we have like these boxes like pre-configured, and that stuff is running. Yeah, that's the gist of it. Anyone else? So, thank you very much for attending and asking all these questions. And we have a special announcement to make, so this guy wants to tell you something really awesome.
Yes, hi to all. I'm Darek. You've probably seen small leaflets at the corridor, and these leaflets was about PHP Central Europe conference, which will be held in Prague next month. And I have a small ask for you, because I'm a guy behind this conference, and I'm small ask to share a small place to write. I would like to show you our discount code for person who are still undecided. Of course, I invite you all.
So what's the discount code?
Discount code is CE loves DD. Simple. We have 10% discount for first 20 people who join us. So
go!
Go. Time start. Thank you.
Thank you. So enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.